Welcome to episode 10 of the Hike Files podcast. I'm your host, Kurt Zitzelman. What's going on? I was hoping to have a guest for you this week, but I could not get the scheduling down, so I waited as long as I could, and it just didn't work out. My backup plan was story time, and I had a few ideas in my head of what I want to talk about. And then this morning, it is Friday morning, the podcast needs to go out in a couple hours, so I got to get this record it and edit it and upload it and all that stuff done really quick. But this morning I got a message from my nephew John, who lives out in Arizona, and he said him and his wife Amanda have binge listened to the first 4 episodes that they had downloaded on their phone, and they loved it and can't wait to hear the rest of them. So A, thank you for reaching out and thanks for listening. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. But you gave me an idea. Since you guys live out in Arizona, I've got a story. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about my trip out to Arizona, more specifically, my trip down into the Grand Canyon. It was the end of 2020. We'd all gone through all the pandemic and all that craziness. And my thought process on a lot of things was changing, and what I was willing to put up with and what I wanted to do. And my friend Todd, who works as one of the shuttle bus drivers out in the Grand Canyon, he kept reaching out to me all year. You got to come out. 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 But it just, I couldn't line it up. It didn't work out. It was either I couldn't get a ticket or everything was locked down or whatever. Wound up going back to work. So he was November. I was pretty fed up with what I was doing for my part-time job. I knew things were slowing down for Hemlock Mountain for that time of year. So I said, I'm going to take a month and I'm going to do this trip the way I really want to do it. So I got a train ticket and I took an Amtrak all the way across the country down to Arizona. That was one of my things I've always wanted to do, was take a train trip across the country. So I have no problem flying, but I want to see the change in the country as you go across. And that was a trip in and of itself. I absolutely love that. Even the time I spent in Chicago, I spent like a 5-hour layover in Chicago. It was so empty. I just walked down to the shore of Lake Michigan and walked around the park there. It was crazy. But so I get out to the Grand Canyon. It's just before Christmas. It was impromptu. I didn't put a lot of planning into the trip. I just knew I had a place to stay out there and anything else I could figure out when I got out there. So I kind of asking Todd and looking at the information at the national park and figured out that I might actually be able to get a permit to go down into the canyon. So you can just walk into the canyon, but you can't stay overnight without a permit. I contacted their backcountry office and I said, look, I don't care where I camp. I don't care if it's the same campsite. I don't care if it's multiple campsites. I don't care. I want 2 nights in the Grand Canyon. Can you hook me up? And they reached out and they said, yeah, we can get you 2 nights at the campground is now called Havasupai Gardens. We can get you 2 nights there and when you want to go, basically. So I set my days and I headed down. So the morning I left, we got up early. Todd went to work pretty early, but he would get up even earlier and we'd go for a hike in the morning. We had breakfast. Like every morning we're doing this. And so he decided to hike down probably about a mile. He came down with me before he had to turn around and head back up so he could go to work. But it was dark. It was pitch black. There was ice on the trail. I hiked all the way down to the 1.5-mile rest house before I started to see light in the sky. And then I was probably halfway to the 3-mile rest house from the 1.5 mile before the sun really started to brighten up the trail and I could see where I was going and I could turn off my headlamp. And it was just incredible. As you go down into the canyon, you see the sun hit it and you realize that you're actually there. You're actually going down into the canyon. The scale of it, when you look down into the canyon from the rim, and it's massive, and it's massive, but you don't realize how big it really is until you start going down this trail and you're winding back and forth and you turn around and you look back at where you came from and you know what it looked like when you're up there, and it just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And then you look ahead and you realize you haven't really gone anywhere yet. you're just dropping and dropping. I get to the campground. I get there about 8:45, 8:30, 9 o'clock, somewhere in there. I know it was before 9. And I didn't think I'd be there that quickly. I got there and I quietly walked into camp, and I found a campsite, and there's nobody in it, and there's no permit on it, and you just take they don't assign you a specific campsite. So I found the one that had the most open sky. I didn't have a hammock with me. I set up the tent that I borrowed from a friend Adam, nice small light trekking pole tent. And the only downside to it was that it was right on the path that takes you over to the restrooms. So I figured there'd be a lot of people walking by, but there weren't a lot of people down there. The Grand Canyon, this was now January, it's the first week of January. There's not many people, and even fewer people go down into the canyon. You do get quite a bit of people down there, but when you compare it to the amount of people that are in the national park itself, not many people go down. So I figured I'd risk it, set up, put my permit in. Ranger came over, and we talked for a few minutes, and I asked her, I said, is this an okay spot? I'm not in somebody's place. And she's, no, you're fine. And I asked, what's the regulations? Do I have to break down every day and then find another campsite, or can I stay here, stay set up? And she's, nope, you're here for 2 days. Stay, keep your stuff set up, use it as a base camp, come and go as you please. And I asked her what the checkout time was on my last day, and she's midnight. You can stay all day. You just can't sleep that last night. You can leave as late as you want. And I know I didn't want to leave at midnight. I could have, but I didn't want to leave at midnight. I stopped. I had some coffee. I had something to eat. And I wasn't sure how I wanted to handle it because I was still 1,400 feet above the canyon floor. And I didn't know if I wanted to just spend the day up on the plateau and hike around, or did I want to go down to the Colorado immediately and then hike around down there for the day and then come up and then spend the second day up on the plateau, or what do I want to do? And I figured, you know what? I'm here. I'm going down to the river. Getting to the bottom of the Grand Canyon has been my goal for so long. I'm just going to go do it. So I threw some stuff in my day pack and I started hiking down. And it was, if you've never been in a canyon, like a legit canyon, it's hard to explain. It's really hard to explain. You feel so tiny when you're down, especially in the Grand Canyon. Like when you're at the rim and you look down, you feel small. But once you get down inside and you're looking back up at where you were a few hours before, and you realize how massive this canyon is, you feel absolutely minuscule. It really changed your perspective on things. And then to see how green it was down there. It was January and it felt like fall. There was leaves on the trees. They were just starting to change color. It was nuts. And it was cold enough that there wasn't any scorpions or snakes or anything like that. So I didn't have that to worry about, but it was a completely different world. And then I kept hiking and it felt like it took forever to get down to the river. And I just kept thinking, am I ever going to make it down to the river? Am I ever going to make it there? And I'm looking up these canyon walls. And then I came around a corner and I saw the Colorado River. And there's a rest house there. I just walked down. There's like a little beach. I walked down and I sat there for probably an hour and just thought about how long I had wanted to get to that spot. And then comes the question, all right, now what? You did it. Now what? It was everything I expected it to be down there, and it was nothing like I expected it to be. I continued to hike around. I decided I'd cross the river, hiked over to there's two bridges. There's a black bridge and a silver bridge. And I went across the black bridge is first, I think. Right? I think the black bridge is first. Or maybe the silver bridge. I don't remember. I'm trying to look at the pictures as they go by on the screen. I don't really remember. I'm looking at the pictures as I look at the screen. But the one that takes you right to the Bright Angel campground. So I went over that, And I stopped for lunch. I ate, and I spent so much time just stopping and looking at stuff. And I looked up at the time and I thought I should probably head back because it's a 1,400-foot climb. And I know that takes time. So I'm going to run out of daylight. So I turned around, headed back up with the thought in my mind that I wasn't coming back down the next day because I just gone down into the Grand Canyon, turned around, went halfway back up. I was going to be exhausted. So I start my trek back up to the campground, expecting it to be dark by the time I get up there. And it took me maybe an hour and a half less to get back up than I expected. I get to camp and I feel fine. I'm not tired. It's not a strenuous hike. It's a really well-maintained trail. There's a lot of steps, but they're not right on top of each other, like little platforms you walk up. And I got up there and I thought, well, I feel really good. So let me eat and then I'll go to bed and I'll see how I feel in the morning. And if I feel up to it, maybe I'll go back down into the canyon. Because if I really want to, I can just day hike down to the plateau if I want to. I don't have to spend the day there just because I'm down at the campsite. So I woke up in the morning and I was so excited to go back down. I got up and I felt fine. My legs were fine. I ate really light, real quick food. And then I hiked down and I had a more proper breakfast down at the bottom. And I hung out on that little beach again for a little while, but it was super early because I left before the sun came up. I spent all day down on the canyon floor. And I checked out Phantom Ranch, and I passed a few people that were heading out. For the most part, because I had the canyon to myself. There was times where it was an hour, maybe 2 hours, and I didn't see a single person, not even walking by on another trail. It was crazy. I never thought that being down in a canyon would be that sparsely populated. Like I knew there's not a lot of people down there, but I thought there'd be somebody. There's people at camp, and like I said, I'd pass people who were like leaving their trip, maybe because it was the days I went down, because it was in the middle of the week. So maybe it was the days I went down, or it was just the time of year. But it was an incredible experience to be in the Grand Canyon, this place I always wanted to go, this place people always talk about, one of the most popular state parks in the country. After being up on the rim for 2 weeks and seeing all the people, there's people everywhere. You couldn't turn around without there being people. And then being down in the canyon and there was nobody. The pictures I took, I didn't have to stop and wait for people to clear the trail to get pictures without people. There's a few I took just to have people in them, just for scale. I did see, I'm watching the slides as they go by, and I'll put these pictures in the show notes if you want to see some of these pictures, if you're not watching the video. The mule train was probably the biggest group of people that I would see. And I would see, you see them the most. There's always mules going by, and they're either bringing visitors down or back, or they're taking supplies down. But other than that, I think the biggest group of people I saw were in the campground. And it was a group of guys who showed up late, were very loud and obnoxious. And the ranger came up like she did with everybody who showed up, and she's, do you have your permit? And you're like, we paid to get into the park. And she's, no, but you still need a permit to be down here. And they got belligerent, and they said, well, we're not paying for a permit to camp in the Grand Canyon. It cost me like $20. It was super cheap. That was just for me. Now, obviously, for 6 guys, it'd be more. But $20 for 2 nights in the Grand Canyon is nothing. So they got mad and they left. And they hiked back up. And they must have got to the rim just as the last buses were leaving. Like they were just shutting down the buses. And when I came out, I talked to Todd and I was talking about these guys. He laughed because he was just pulling away as they came up over the rim. And it was his last run. And they're like, wait, please wait. So he stopped and he let them on the bus, and he could hear them complaining the whole time. And as I told him what happened down at the campground, he said, man, I should have just drove away. I should just let him walk. It was, again, I get it. You pay to get into the park, and it doesn't give you access to everything. It gives you access to the public areas of the park. But there's a lot that goes into maintaining those campsites. Down in the bottom, you've got rangers down there. You've got mules down there. There's really nice campsites. They got little pavilions over picnic tables. They got no fire rings. You cannot have a fire. They've got nice restrooms. There's water. They put weather reports up for you because there's no signal. The trail's well maintained. You've got water sources in multiple places. Now, it wasn't super hot when I was down there, so I was okay, but it is nice to know that you've got water. And even when the Colorado is flowing good, you don't want to really pull your water out of there because it goes through a lot of sandstone, so the water itself is really sandy. Even with the filter, you'll kill your filter if you're filtering the Colorado water. So you'd have to pull it out, let it sit, and then try to filter it, or have a coffee filter, strain it, get all the grit out that you can, and then filter it. So it's not easy to get water out of the Colorado. You could if you absolutely had to, but it's not easy. So they do have water stations. So you can just go get water, which there's the Phantom Ranch down there, which I don't know how much that is. That's more like cabins. It's not really camping. I would consider it camping. If I went down there and I stayed there, I would consider that camping because you're in the Grand Canyon. But they got like these little cabins. They've got a store down there. There's not a lot in there, and what is in there is expensive. So just be prepared for that. But there are ways down there that you could take a mule and ride down if you don't want to do the hike. It is 4,000 feet of elevation from the rim down to the canyon floor. And it's only 8 trail miles if you're taking Bright Angel. It's less if you're taking some of the other trails because they're more direct. But it doesn't even look real. Excuse me. It doesn't even look real. The last day, I got up and hiked out to the point right outside the campsite. It was about a mile and a half. It was about a mile and a half walk out, and you're looking down at the Colorado. You're 1,400 feet above it, and it does not look like it. It just looks like it's right there because of the scale of it. And then you turn around and you're looking across this plateau, and you're looking back at the wall, the main wall of the canyon, and it doesn't look so bad. And you're thinking in your brain, it's just going through your head, that's 3,000 feet of sheer vertical cliff, but it looks like a couple hundred feet because it's so massive. It's 3 miles away, roughly, and it's 3,000 feet high, and it just, because there's nothing else around, it's really hard to get that into your head. But if it's something that you've wanted to do, I would definitely say take the time, make the time if you have to, and go to the Grand Canyon. Even if you can't get down inside the canyon for a camping trip, hike down as far as you feel comfortable, take your time, pay attention to the time of year. In the summer, it is super, super hot down there. There's signs everywhere. There's warnings everywhere. This isn't a joke. Heat exhaustion, heat stroke, you could die if you're not prepared in the summer. And every year, people die of dehydration and heat stroke. It's no joke. Be prepared. Over prepare. If you think, I've hiked in heat before, no, you haven't. If you think you've made steep climbs before, no, you haven't. Just over prepare. Just get yourself in the mindset that it's going to be harder than you think, and then go do it. If you don't want to hike it, see if you can get a mule and take the mules down, and then bring the mules back up. There's nothing wrong with that. That actually looks fun. I wouldn't mind doing that myself. It's an incredible place to be, though. And if you could spend a night, I highly recommend it. One of the coolest things I saw, not even down inside the canyon, but from the rim was, I think it was right between Christmas and New Year's. And it was before I went down into the canyon, and it snowed. Now, where Todd lives is in the national park in what's known as Grand Canyon Village. It's where all the employees live. It's a 15-minute walk from his door to the edge of the canyon. So it was snowing. I walked out to the end to the canyon, and I sat there and I watched it snow. And it was snowing like you couldn't see a half mile. But you could look out into the canyon, and you could see the snow falling into the canyon, and it would get to a certain depth down in the canyon, and you could see where the temperature would change. It would turn to rain. And then once it stopped snowing, it just turned to fog, and the entire canyon just disappeared in fog. It was the wildest thing I've ever seen. If you can get out there in the winter, I'm sure in the summer, it's incredible. And that's when all the animals, and it's nice and warm up on the canyon, on the rim. But in the winter, I am so happy I went in the winter. It was absolutely amazing to see that place in the winter. That's the end of story time for this week. It was not very well put together, and I apologize. Just me rambling about the Grand Canyon. I'm going to try to have the guest for you next week. If not, I'll be more prepared for the show. John, Amanda, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for reaching out and giving me an idea of what to talk about this week. I'm going to immediately edit this and get this uploaded for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you next week in episode 11 of the Hike Follows podcast.